Hello, welcome to Strange Reads. I'm David and today's story is The Mask by Robert W. Chambers. Robert W. Chambers is something of an enigma. He's a man who's famous for the creeping horror of The King in Yellow, but much to the chagrin of some of his peers, he paid his way through life by writing romantic bestsellers. But who is he? Here's a section of video that might help us both understand.
Robert William Chambers was born in Brooklyn on the 26th of May, 1865, into a prominent New York family. His parents, William P. Chambers and Carolyn Smith Borton, met when his mother was just 12 years old. His father interned with Carolyn's father, Joseph Borton, and later formed a law firm together, Chambers and Borton. Robert W. Chambers received his education at Brooklyn Polytechnic Institute before attending the Art Students League in New York when aged 20. Chambers furthered his artistic studies at the Académie Julian when he moved to Paris, France in 1886. Although in the summer of 1887, he moved his studies to the University of Munich, where he penned his first novel, In the Quarter, which would be published later in 1894. Still, with a passion for art, he returned to France but changed institutions, attending l'École des Beaux-Arts, successfully displaying his work at the Paris Salons in 1889. By 1893, he had returned to New York, where he found success selling his illustrations to magazines such as Life, Truth, and Vogue. Chambers and his friend Charles Dana Gibson would sketch each other and submit the results to Life magazine. One of Chambers' sketches received publication, but at that time his friend didn't have the same success. However, later in life, Charles Gibson became a successful illustrator and bought Life magazine in 1918. When Chambers wrote Bluebird Weather in 1912, he asked Charles to provide the illustrations. Then, during his late 20s, for reasons not clearly documented, Chambers turned his creative focus from illustrating to writing, and, feeling his output improved when writing in the country, Chambers moved to Fulton County, New York. In 1898, Chambers married Elsa Vaughan Moeller. Together they had one son, Robert Edward Stewart Chambers, who, like his father, also became an author. The family spent their time living between New York City and the Adirondack Mountains. At first, he started submitting articles, together with his illustrations, to newspapers and magazines. Eventually, Chambers turned to writing romance to ensure an income. He became one of the most successful authors of his period and produced several bestsellers in the genre. Over the next 40 years, he published 72 novels, short stories, and several plays. His works covered a broad range of subject matter, such as historical romance and the supernatural. Literary critics praised him. However, as his popularity and success grew, the opinions of the critics changed, especially by one who suggested his famed collection of short stories, The King in Yellow, was written under the influence of drugs. After an unsuccessful operation due to an intestinal disorder, Chambers passed away on the 16th of December, 1933, aged 68. The King in Yellow remains the work most praised in the Chambers oeuvre. Everett Blayler, a science fiction and fantasy scholar of the 1940s, described The King in Yellow as one of the most important works of American supernatural fiction.
You might be asking yourself, why isn't he wearing a mask? This is Strange Reads. Perhaps I am. Once again, I've read the story for you. It's on the channel under Strange Readings, Robert W. Chambers, The Mask. For those of you not wanting to wait that long, here it is in a nutshell.
The story begins with an excerpt from the fictitious play The King in Yellow. Maybe a device to create a foreboding mood or to amplify the relevance of a later incident. The opening is incredible. I love it. One of my favourite pieces of writing anywhere. Have I mentioned this before? Alec and Boris, two young artists, are at Boris's studio in Paris. Boris demonstrates a remarkable discovery he's made. He drops an Easter lily into a basin filled with a crystalline liquid. The flower turns into the purest marble. Yesterday, I tried one of Genevieve's goldfish. There it is. He cautions Alex against touching the liquid before questioning whether the lily has been destroyed in its new form. Boris is a sculptor and declares he would never use the technique to replace his art. Last year, he had great success at the Salon with a depiction of the Madonna, for which Genevieve modelled. Nothing he's done this year has reached the same level of quality. Alec, the narrator, is a painter and works at Boris's home with another man, Jack Scott. They're a tight-knit group. Alex suspects that Boris may be fond of him, as Genevieve had declared her love for both men, but ultimately chose Boris as her suitor. Genevieve arrives. Alec is besotted, and then notices she is more distant, not as playful as usual, perhaps because Boris is present. She leaves briefly, before returning and excusing her behaviour. The youths join arms and parade into the dining room, scandalizing the servants. Alec, working on a piece in Genevieve's boudoir, spent a lot of time at the house. One quiet afternoon in the bathing room, he came across Boris, cleaning up after sculpting. They engage in some playful banter, to which Boris responds by wrestling Alec toward the pool. "Good God," he said. "I forgot, the pool is full of the solution." Understandably, both men are horrified. Alec asks Boris why he has such a small lake of that gruesome stuff. Boris said he is keen to experiment on something larger, something like the big white rabbit that frequents the house. Jack Scott arrives and takes Boris to visit the Luxembourg Gallery, where Rodin and Monet were stealing the show. Alec decides to relax with a pipe and eventually drifts into slumber. He awakens to darkness and the sound of sad music. A figure moves through the darkness, weeping. As Alec calls out, "Genevieve!" she falls and sprains her ankle. Alec, understandably, is horrified, fearing he's startled her into a fall. She smiled adorably, then said, "Alec, I tripped on that wolf's head, and I think my ankle is sprained. Please call Marie and go home." The sprain is nothing, but Genevieve has fallen into an unexplainable fever. The young men try to distract themselves as they wait for news of Genevieve's condition. "Come and see my rose-coloured bath full of death," Boris cries. "Is it death?" Alec asks to humour his mood. "You're not prepared to call it life, I suppose." Boris plucks a goldfish, squirming and twisting from its globe. He tosses it into the liquid, and it is at once petrified, sinking to the bottom. Jack Scott enters and conspires with Boris to try the procedure on the rabbit. Alec refuses to witness the life going out of a warm living creature. He takes a random book and sits down to read. Alas, I had found the King in Yellow. After a few moments, which seemed like ages, he put the book down with a nervous shudder. His friends returned with their marble rabbit as the bell rings from upstairs. They race upstairs to find Genevieve sitting on her bedside. She declares it is Alec she loves, and not Boris. Boris is good-natured about his disappointment and insists that Alec shouldn't be saddened. Alec seizes Jack Scott and they cross the street to their own apartment to give Boris some space. Seeing that Alec too is getting unwell, Jack calls for the doctor. The last thing Alec recollects is hearing Jack ask the doctor, "What ails him to wear a face like that?" "I thought of the King in Yellow and the pallid mask." Alec is ill for some time. He sees the faces of his friends above him. As he regains his strength, he requests their company. But Jack is hesitant. Eventually, Jack explains that his friends are dead. Genevieve, under the influence of medication, had fallen into the pool, and Boris had, at once, shot himself. Jack says he has destroyed everything about Boris's discovery. With the doctor, he has covered up Boris's suicide and told the servants that Boris and Genevieve will be travelling in distant lands for several years. Genevieve lies before the Madonna in the marble room. Unable to live in the house left to him in Boris's will, Alec leaves the next day for Constantinople. For the next 2 years, Alec and Jack Scott correspond by letter, barely mentioning Boris and Genevieve. Eventually, traumatized by sleepless nights and nightmares, Jack asks to meet Alec in Paris. The meeting doesn't help Jack with his nightmares, and he leaves for the Channel Islands. Alec rediscovers a comfort in entering Boris's old house. It has been kept in order by the servants, so he decides to move in and live there. One day as he smoked on a pipe, a distressed maid appeared before him with a letter. Before he opened the envelope, he asked what concerned her. She asked what should be done with a white rabbit caught running around the house. The letter was from Jack. Incoherent and without reason, he begged Alec not to leave the house. The maid, still standing in the doorway, then said people were playing tricks on her to get her into trouble. The marble fish were gone and had been replaced by live ones flopping about on the floor. Alec reassured the woman, sending her away, and relocated to the studio. Among his things, he saw the Easter lily, no longer marble. It lay fresh and fragile, filling the air with perfume. At once, Alec comprehended. Springing through the hallway to the marble room, he flung the doors open. Sunlight streamed into his face. The Madonna smiled, and Genevieve lifted her head from the marble pillow and opened her sleepy eyes.
Is the mask some sort of metaphorical facade that Alec, the narrator, is wearing to hide his love for Genevieve? For Genevieve. Keeping that hidden from Boris. So he's sort of wearing a mask all the time. Is that what's going on? It's got nothing to do with turning things to marble, has it? This would mean that the story isn't about the amazing chemical petrifying marble making stuff that Boris has found. It's more about the romance. Welcome to Romance Reads.
The King in Yellow is a curious collection of 10 short stories that foreshadow the writing career of Robert W. Chambers. The first 4 tales, The Repairer of Reputations, The Mask, In the Court of the Dragon, and The Yellow Sign, reference a play titled The King in Yellow. Characters reading this play risk despair, madness, or worse. Robert W. Chambers set the stories in environments familiar to him. The Repairer of Reputations and The Yellow Sign take place in a dystopian version of 1920s America, whereas The Mask and In the Court of the Dragon are set in Paris. The macabre nature of the opening stories fades away, and the collection becomes consistent with the romantic fiction style of Chambers' later work. Chambers drew a direct influence from Ambrose Bierce, using the names Carcosa, Harley, and Hastur. However, Bierce used Hastur as the god of shepherds. Chambers employed the name only as a location. Edgar Allan Poe's The Mask of the Red Death possibly influenced the opening of The Mask. In Poe's story, Prince Prospero demands the stranger dressed as the Red Death remove his mask and robes. When the stranger complies, there's nothing underneath the facade. The fictitious play The King in Yellow never appears in full, but seems to have at least 2 acts and at least 3 characters: Casilda, Camilla, and the stranger. Of the few details the reader is given, we learn of Casilda's song and the short excerpt from the beginning of The Mask. Characters are drawn into the play. For example, in The Mask, Alec throws the book on the fire, only to rescue the pages after seeing something of the second act. The play is described as having a banal first act, creating a stark contrast, amplifying the disturbing content of the second. The final moment of the first act depicts Camilla's agonized scream and awful words echoing through the dim streets of Carcosa. If you weren't familiar with The King in Yellow, you may still be aware of Lovecraft's Necronomicon. Lovecraft was a fan of Chambers' early work, and I feel I'm not being too daring to suggest that The King in Yellow, which drives one mad upon reading, may have inspired Lovecraft to create a similar literary device, the Necronomicon, a fictitious book written by the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred, capable of driving the reader insane upon reading its pages. H.P. Lovecraft said of Chambers in a letter to Clark Ashton Smith,
Chambers is like Rupert Hughes and a few other fallen titans, equipped with the right brains and education, but wholly out of the habit of using them.
Perhaps due to this connection, the King in Yellow is an ever-present character in many Lovecraft-inspired board game series. The first season of HBO's True Detective revolves around a series of crimes committed by the Yellow King. Carcosa is mentioned on numerous occasions. However, as the series reaches a climax, instead of the cosmic horror ending, which would have been awe-inspiring, True Detective fell over the line with a police procedural "we got the guy" finale.
Thank you for watching. I'm not so sure if Robert W. Chambers will be the draw card that Ray Bradbury was, but I really think he holds a valuable place in the speculative fiction Hall of Fame. So once again, thank you for watching. I hope The Mask gets you thinking, and if about nothing else, maybe it's about where The Mask sits in history and its influence on stories that came later on by other great authors. And if you've already had those thoughts, please stick them in the comment section. Please drop us a like and subscribe, like seeing the next episode depends on it. Discover more speculative fiction tales in one of our other episodes. For everything else, our social media links are on the screen. And remember, take off your mask. I mean, keep it strange.